We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello, my name is Marlin Detweiler, president of Veritas Press, and you have joined us for the first episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have with us Doug Wilson. Doug, thank you for joining us. I gave Doug some warning that this might be entering hostile territory and be a bit adversarial, and I don't mean that completely. Doug has been a good friend, but Doug has taken a tact with which we want to interact, and he's agreed to do it, having seen the questions ahead of time as a way of really getting him prepared for it and making sure that he didn't feel like I was submarining him. I want to first say to you, Doug, that we have an enormous debt of gratitude to pay to you, as many of us do, and those that enjoy and practice the educational pedagogy of classical Christian education. That goes all over the world. Veritas Press in particular, and our online school, which is within Veritas Press, and of course, Laurie and me and our family owe a great debt of gratitude. Your work and your interest in popularizing classical Christian education has made a tremendous impact on us in particular and many people that we come in contact with. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
For those of you that don't know, Doug is the author of Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning. It is a book that was written as a way of talking about their response in a little town in northern Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, where he and a group of parents started Logos School on the model of the Sayers essay, The Lost Tools of Learning. And if you haven't read that book, it is easily deserving of the title Seminal Work in Classical Christian Education. It was life-changing to us when we read it. We called Doug, and at that time, he even answered his own phone. I remember how you answered. Can you give us that?
I forget.
Doug speaking.
Doug speaking. Yeah. That's.
It was great. Well, this podcast could go a lot of different directions, but I really want to focus on one thing. As I told you, the concern that we have for the rhetorical approach that you take in public discourse. And before I get into some questions, let me set some parameters here to help those that may not understand what I mean by that. I've once heard from a pastor who left the church denomination that you were involved in starting and a part of that he was tired of his apologetic being that Doug's not a bad guy. And I thought it funny too, but I also thought it concerning. Of course, back in 1993, you and two school administrators, both by the name of Tom, and I together started the Association of Classical and Christian Schools. Today, there are 400 to 500 schools around the country, in fact, around the world. But I would say maybe with a different rhetorical approach by you, that might be 4,000 or 5,000. And I think that there would be considerably more success and thousands of schools with a different voice. What's interesting to me is, and I'm going to ask you some questions in just a minute, trying to set the parameters here. But what's interesting to me is it's not the voice that you used in Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning. And that is, as best I know, your most successful book. Is there a lesson there? That's an open question now.
Mm-hmm. Right. So is that the question?
Yeah, that is.
Okay. So there's no way to talk about what I do without getting into what I do. And I'm not trying to humble brag, or I'm not trying to do anything like that, but I've written about 100 books. Okay. So, and Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning is one of them. And most of them are like recovering the lost tools of learning in terms of, I've written one book, Serrated Edge, in defense of biblical satire, and I've written some novels that are openly satiric, and I've written some things that are, really examples of the kind of rhetoric that you're concerned about. But I've written many marriage books, family books, child rearing books, so it's not a Johnny one note sort of thing. That's the first thing. It's not like I was on my meds when I wrote Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning and then got off my meds to write all the other stuff. The problem with counterfactuals, like we have hundreds of schools, the classical school movement is in the main healthy and conservative and standing against the tides of wokeness. And I think it's quite possible that you're right, that if we had not adopted the polemical posture or the adversarial posture that we do have, that we could have had thousands of schools. That's quite right. But I would also postulate that it was quite possible that half of those thousands of schools would be part of the problem, would be in the process of going woke, because no one is willing to yell fire when the school's on fire. So we are in a time, I believe, when we're seeing our civilization come apart. And we also live in a time when anybody who points out that it's coming apart, whether they do so mildly or satirically or in a loud voice or in a quiet voice, they can have their careers ended and ruined. You could have a mild-mannered professor at an ostensibly Christian college say something like, I think that boys are made of snips and snails and puppy dog tails, and lose his job over that. Right. How many people find themselves down in HR because they said something perfectly innocuous 20 years ago? So the thing that I'm concerned about is without an adversarial benchmark, without some sort of, here's the flag, boys, this is what we're fighting over. We could have thousands of schools, but I don't want to be part of a movement that has thousands of schools that are an essential part of the problem.
Well, I agree with that. And I think I provide evidence that it doesn't become that necessarily. We are a single school with over 10,000 students, well over 10,000 students, and we are not subject to that. When we have been asked about certain things, we've answered them clearly and directly, and our policies and our practices have not changed in the 16 years that we have offered online classes. So I don't think it is a given that if the ACCS were thousands of schools, that half of them would be problematic. Before I jump into some very specific questions, I want to make another note. You are absolutely right. I've read many of your books, and you're absolutely right that you don't always adopt a satirical or maybe mocking type of mindset. At the same time, well, let me just say, in addition to that, I've heard you preach, I've heard you speak, and from the pulpit, in the context of Christian worship, I've never heard you communicate that way. It is not the way that I have commonly seen you preach, and parishioners of the church, members of the church who have heard you preach a whole lot more than me confirm that. The other thing I'd say is some of the people with whom you have, you may not like this term, and there may be a better term, but it'll make the point, picked fights or gone after a bit, you would not do in the same way if they were in your home.
Right.
And
fair enough.
I have not seen that. And I think to me, there's a disconnect there. So let me just ask you some questions, the questions that you've seen. What is your goal in using satire, mockery, and belligerence?
It's to encourage the saints.
Okay.
So
does it work?
Yes, it does. So for example, this is one of those things where I want to be careful, and just as I think that you want to be careful in the same way.
Sure.
Cancer. I'm going to point to some growth indicators, but cancer grows, morning glory grows, and Canadian thistle grows. So just the simple fact of growth doesn't justify anything.
Correct.
But if the argument is your belligerence is off-putting or your polemical stance is off-putting, one of the things you would have to then account for is why our little town here, Moscow, is the receiving station for a wide column of refugees from all over the country. Hundreds, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of people over the last year and a half coming into Moscow, pulling up stakes, moving out. I've got to get the heck out of California. I've got to get out of Illinois. I've got to get away from my pastors who won't stand up for me. My elders, they won't draw a line. We've got an evangelical church that is led largely by invertebrates, and so what I have seen, and this is a central part of the goal, is to provide a voice for the voiceless, to fight on behalf of those who need a defender, to articulate what these people would desperately want to see articulated. Now, when I first started the magazine Credenda Agenda in 1988, my ideal reader, I picked, who am I writing for?
Sure.
That
we
so
call
I
that a
picked
persona in marketing terms. Yeah.
Okay. So I picked in 1988, I picked the average reader that I was writing for. And I've not varied from that since that time. And that person is someone who's really upset or distraught or disquieted by what he sees going around him in the evangelical church, and doesn't know how to articulate what's wrong with it, but he knows that something's wrong with it. And when he reads what I write, he says, yes, that's it. That's it. Now, I've had, now I don't, when we did Credenda, I had that voice in just one, out of 30-page magazine. I would use that voice in maybe one or two of the pages. It was not again, Johnny One Note, but it was, that element was there. And I want people to know that satire or a polemical discourse is a tool that you pick up and to use for a particular purpose. And when you're done, you put it down again. It's not, I don't write the way I do, in other words, because my personality is broken and I can't help it. When I write this way, I'm picking up a particular tool off the workbench and employing it for a particular reason. Now, over the years, I've wanted to know, am I hitting that target? So I've been writing for that person, here with my keyboard. I'm writing for that guy, but what evidence do I have that I'm getting through to him? Well, our ministry has grown and flourished up to the point that hundreds of people have moved here, and many of them have done so because they felt abandoned by the leadership of the evangelical church. Nobody's calling a spade a spade. No, nobody's willing to get out there. Now, there's a fork in the road. When someone comes to me and says, what you're doing, this style of communication is unbiblical, my response to that is, that's a great argument. Let's have a Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let's
go. Let me just interject there. I don't think it is unbiblical, and I do think there is a time and place. But what I would say about the growth that you cited is that I could cite the growth of a church that a pastor took from 200 to 20,000, a lot bigger than the church that you're a part of. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it grew necessarily for reasons that you would be comfortable with.
Oh, I know. That's why I started by saying morning glory grows.
Yeah.
Cancer grows. Yeah. So the growth is not but what I'm saying is that you can't say that what you're doing is turning people off, because it's a lot of people are attracted to it. So you can say it turns some people off, and you can say that it attracts others, and then it's the inescapable concept, not whether but which. So that's the other thing is when I travel around the country, when I speak at conferences, and someone comes up and says, I've read your book, this book or that book, and then they chuckle. One of the things I want to note is, what kind of person is that? What kind of person likes what I do? Now, if 9 out of 10 of those people that I meet have 3 heads and 2 of them are drooling, I think, okay, I'm reaching the wrong audience. I'm reaching the wrong audience. But overwhelmingly, the people who move here, the people I meet, the people who are responsive are sweet, godly, conscientious, faithful Christians, and their families are in order, and they feel like I'm articulating something that nobody else will say. And that's something I just read in my Twitter feed. You know what Doug's doing? Doug's doing what nobody else will say. Doug's saying what all of us are thinking, but no one is willing to say. And so I take all kinds of brickbats and things thrown at me because I'm trying to put a voice. I'm trying to articulate a voice for the voiceless.
That's not the only possible conclusion from the data, though. Another conclusion would be that it is accomplishing something good with some people, but it may be that good is the enemy of what's best.
Yeah, that's possible. That should be put on the table. That should be put on the table. So if someone said, Doug, are you sort of metaphysically committed to the idea that you cannot screw anything up, or that you can't do it wrong, or can't do it at less than the way it ought to? Oh, that's a live option. Absolutely.
Well, let me put one of those questions out there for you. Is this kind of mockery not some sort of bullying?
No, because one of the things I do, and I think you'll see, if we went back and looked over my polemical writing, almost never, and let's say we exclude all my straight writing, family books and stuff like that, and we just zeroed in on my satiric novels or my polemical, no holds barred, no quarter November kind of writing. Okay.
Things like Left Behind, or Right Behind, I mean? Your book, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Things like that. Okay.
Well, that was Nate's book, but we published it, and so that would be in the 5%, right? So there's 95% of the time, I'm not making fun of a particular individual. I'm very careful when I include a name, when I finally say, okay, Tim Keller or Russell Moore, or if I'm interacting with someone that's a real person on the other side of this, I am it goes back to your point about how would I deal with someone in my living room?
Right.
When I put a name on it, I would like to be able the next week to have that person in my living room, or if that person showed up at church, to serve them the Lord's Supper. What I do is more like the job of a cartoonist. Let's say I'm a cartoonist and I draw a liberal peacenik demonstrator, some lady, and I draw her with hippie glasses and a tie-dye shirt, and I caricature certain elements of that kind of person, and I really go after that sort of thing. But I don't say, and this is Henrietta Smith, who lives in Des Moines. What I'm doing is painting a caricature. This is something that Jesus does in Matthew 23, when he says, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. And he paints a picture, and he does it as a caricaturist. They give lengthy prayers, and they blow trumpets before they give a donation. He caricatures them, and he does it very effectively as a cartoonist, but he names no names. He doesn't say, and take that, Caiaphas. He doesn't do that. And I'm very careful to try to imitate that.
Yeah, time permitting, we'll come back to Tim and something there. But what do you think? What kind of people are actually persuaded by mockery and belligerence. Well, let me leave it at that for now.
I would say the people who are persuaded are the people who have lived under mockery themselves for months and years, where they are the downtrodden. They are the ones who are insulted because they still believe the confession of faith and they thought they joined a Presbyterian church and everything's drifting left, and they're the ones who are uptight. So the people that I'm persuading, the people that I'm encouraging, again, are the people that our current cultural moment is hell-bent on ostracizing. So what I'm trying to do is stick up for that guy. And thus far, from the feedback I get from those guys, from the people, again, the people moving here and the people who try to reproduce what we're doing and people who sell books and all of that, is that I'm effectively speaking for them. Now, if someone said, yeah, this goes back to the first counterfactual. If you said, yes, you're speaking effectively for 5,000 people in that position, if you just change your tactics, it could have been 5 million. Or, we could have a debate about that. But I do know that there's a real class of a not insignificant number of Christians who feel like what I've been doing is a lifeline. I'm not crazy. The world is crazy. The world's crazy.
The world is crazy, easily granted. And there are people that support the style and the approach that you've taken.
Right.
But as I had a father of one of my friends in high school, and I asked him, I said, why did you start believing this instead of that? And he said, because I started listening to the other side. And it was a good change as far as I was concerned. It was a spiritual matter. It was a good change. And the point that I would make is, you might be able to cite that 1,000 or 20,000 people moved to Moscow. I know it wasn't 20,000, so I'll say a larger number than reality.
Right.
But there are probably a lot more than that. I hesitate to put a number out, but hundreds of thousands who would say it's problematic and it's less than ideal, and it's in some senses counterproductive. I have become one of those people. At Veritas, we have been put in a position to answer the question, what's Doug's role with you all? Why do you support him? And I don't want to get into theological issues. I recognize that those are complicated matters. You and I have talked about them many hours, and we talked about historic issues and that sort of thing. What I want to focus on is a style of communication that I have grown to believe is far less effective than some alternatives. And I would say, with regard to your church, as I understand it, you're maybe 12 to 1,500, a second church there, so maybe 3,000 maximum total. To me, citing those numbers is not impressive because it's not that big.
Well, it's there's two things. There's a difference. Back up. We're not a mega church. If we moved all our people here in Moscow into a mid-sized American city, we'd be a below average. We could be we could get a big box store and be a big box church, and not be an insult to the faith in terms of numbers. That's true. So we're not a mega church, but we are a church that punches way above our weight.
Absolutely. I know that. So
I describe that as being a meta church. So it's not mega. We're not huge numbers. We are the biggest in Moscow. So but this is a small town. But when you look at things like web traffic, when you look at things what circulates or what sorts of things we respond to, a strong argument can be made that we have become the voice of the conservative resistance, theologically speaking. We're not the voice of secular conservatism, but I think in evangelical Christianity in North America, I believe that we are the voice of the conservative resistance.
I can't speak to that, but it gets a little bit far afield, I guess, if I would respond. My concern is that what I was addressing was your citation for it being a good thing was because a lot of people are coming there. My comment is
I have to stop that. I have to stop you there. I'm not saying it's a good thing because people are coming. I'm saying you can't argue that you're turning people off. The point is, back up when I said, if people say what you're doing is unbiblical, I'd say, let's have a Bible study. Then they move over and say, what you're doing is counterproductive. Okay. Now, if they say, all right, it's counterproductive, then the question is compared to what? If you're saying compared to what could have been, we're going to come to that question with our respective paradigms. But you can't say, there are some people, there's some preachers who just insult everybody in the congregation. The sanctuary empties out. They're dwindling down to 10 people. And if I say, man, this is unbiblical, and he says, well, I think it's biblical, then we move over, I think it's counterproductive. I can say, and he says, well, I don't think it's counterproductive. I can tell him that in another couple of months, you're going to have to shut the doors. You're dwindling down to nothing. That's
no. You're creating a straw man there, because we have made a clear decision to operate in a way that is consistent with, in fact, it was the reason that we have a rhetoric book called A Rhetoric of Love, compared and it contrasts to a rhetoric of domination. And I would categorize the kind of rhetoric in the satirical environment, to the extent that you do that, and I understand you don't always do it, we've covered that, but I would categorize that frequently as a rhetoric of domination and as a counterproductive thing. One of the things that I think we have missed as Christians, very simply stated, is the way that we fight isn't the way the world fights. It strikes me that this form of mockery is primarily the way the world fights. It's actually going after some elements like the woke crowd and other things in the same way that they fight. And I don't think that's the way that the gospel teaches us to fight in a primary sense. I think in a primary sense, it teaches us to make a traitor out of our enemy. We love our neighbor, and the enemy becomes a traitor to their own cause, joining the cause of the gospel.
Yeah, I agree with that part. But let me tie your comment about domination back to your earlier question about bullying. Okay. So it is the language of domination in Narnia. I think it's King Loon tells his son when he's making fun of Rabadash, who's hung on the hook. Don't taunt an enemy. Don't taunt an enemy. Say when he's stronger than you, then as you please. Right. So we're not dominating anybody. I'm not kicking puppies. I'm not picking on the little guy. I'm not insulting. I'm not punching down. None of. So we are in a blind alley, backs to the wall. A band of armed thugs are coming after us, and we are fighting. As I've repeatedly said, we don't want to fight like thugs. We want to fight like cavaliers. We want to be merry warriors. We don't want to be surly. We don't want to be hard bitten. We don't want to be, talking out of the side of our mouth. But it's not bullying. We are being bullied. It's not domineering. They're attempting to domineer us. And what we're doing is we're saying we're not having any. We're not going to go along with your program, and we're going to fight. We're going to resist, but it's not domineering. All right. So when Jesus goes into the temple and flips over the tables, he's not domineering. This is what got him killed. Right. He goes He goes to Jerusalem as a solitary prophet. There's only 2 swords in the whole company, and he tells Peter to put one of them away. Jesus went to Jerusalem to pick a fight with the authorities, and he did not do the gentle Jesus, meek and mild approach. He and they domineered him. They crucified him.
Right.
They went after him, and so his rhetoric, God will judge you, you whited sepulcher. His rhetoric included cartoon, very pointed caricatures, straining out a gnat, swallowing a camel going through the eye of a needle. He's a very effective satirist. And the power relation that we are operating with is we are seeing the republic disintegrate before our eyes. And basically, the time is coming, unless God grants a great Reformation revival, the time is coming when I and all the sweet Christians are going to be loaded into the same cattle car and taken off to the camps. And we can have our debates there about this. But I would say that I saw what was coming decades ago. The cultural moment we are currently in, I started calling it out in the 90s, and people didn't believe me. And this, I see occasional comments now. I just saw this last week on Twitter. Someone said something like, "Say what you want about Wilson, he predicted this cultural moment years and years ago."
Yeah.
Which I did.
Yeah, no doubt. But all of that doesn't mean that it follows that our backs are in the alley, against the wall, in the dark, the metaphor that you created just a moment ago, that they're there because of wokeness and because of those kinds of things. Sometimes we end up in those positions because we do things that cause that.
Right. So one time the author of Rhetoric of Love that you sell, who was our colleague here for a number of years, Doug Jones, we had a speaker, an unbelieving speaker, come in to address our students at Disputatio at New St. Andrews. Mm-hmm. And I remember in the Q&A, Doug Jones asked him, and this was before Doug developed the convictions on display in Rhetoric of Love. He asked him, what do you think of the late night comedians, making fun of Republican presidents and stuff? And the guy said, "Oh, it's great. Satire is great when it's lampooning an approved victim."
Right.
Okay. So if late night comedians want to make fun of evangelicals or of Donald Trump or of any generic Republican congressman or whatever, it's open season and nobody objects to the rhetoric. Okay. What they object to is the rhetoric being deployed against a target, one of their sacred cows. So if you go after a sacred cow, that's the issue. It's not the rhetoric you use.
Well, that is true, no doubt, and it's incredibly true today. But that is not true of how I am expressing concern, because I'm taking a very different tact than what might be a common practice in my expression of concern to you about this. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you're attacking my own or you're attacking somebody with whom I have great difference.
So let me stick a pin in this and ask you what you think of this. Most standard mainline evangelicals are so nice and are so sweet that diabetics can't be friends with them, right? All right. So, and I'm talking about men like Jack Phillips, the Colorado cake baker, or Barronell Stutzman in Washington, the florist, the people, the photographers and videographers and the wedding coordinators and stuff. These people are the sweetest, nicest people in the world. And they are in the front lines of this battle that is going on, not because of their satiric gifts, not because they write, not because they pop off and let others get it. They are in the crosshairs. They are in trouble. They are in court because they are standing in the path of the sexual revolution. Okay, simply, and anybody who gets in the way of the sexual revolution, whether or not they've ever made a joke at the expense of the woke agenda, as I have, and as they haven't, anybody who gets in the way is given the same treatment. They are called a hater.
Right.
You know, they're called a hater. And thus far, Veritas has not been put in that position. But I can guarantee you that if the right employee complained, and if it was a slow news day, and if something, you know, if all you need to have happen is to have 2 or 3 pieces fall into place, and you would find yourself in the middle of a firestorm, and you could be the sweetest guy in the world. And as I'm happy to tell people, Marlin actually is. So,
I hope you don't say that, because I don't expect you to believe it.
Well, not entirely, but you have been a good friend, and I would read on the internet all of the there'd be an eruption of lies told about you.
That has happened, actually.
Right.
And
So,
and my approach to it was to go silent and let it die, and it worked.
Right. Yeah.
It may not always be the case, but it generally takes 2 to tango, and the person swinging at you gets very tired very quickly if you don't swing back.
And just so you know, there have been many times when I have refused to take the bait offers.
I don't doubt that. Yeah.
Right. Many times. So I agree. I think I know the situation you're talking about, and I greatly admired how you handled that one, and thought that was the right call, the right thing, the right approach. That was all good. But it's not a one size fits all deal.
That's
so.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, sometimes you let it go. Sometimes you let the other guy swing until he's tired. Sometimes if someone says something on Twitter about me, for example, some slander, I click on their profile. Usually it's 3 followers, probably mom and sister. And I know that if I answer this guy, I've just made his day. I've just handed him a microphone.
Yeah.
But there are other times where I click on it and there's 120,000 followers, and what they've just done is they've just handed me the microphone. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I can say something. So I believe that if I had a personality that had to mix it up, and the Bible says that an elder can't be a belligerent man. He can't be a brawler. So if I were in these fights all the time, because I couldn't help it, because I just had to mix it up with whoever, and if it's not this guy online, it's going to be the waitress at the restaurant, that would disqualify me from ministry. But if I am selective about what fights I get into, if I'm very selective about what fights I get into where I name names, I really want to be careful there, then I think that it's a question of strategy and tactics, and you make your best judgment and go.
Yeah. Well, I certainly understand that, and there are times where it does require us to stand up for things in ways that can be fighting. But I don't think it follows that mockery and maybe even belligerence are necessary. We have Doug Wilson here with us. We're going to do this again in our next episode of Veritas Vox. Thanks for joining us, Doug. We really appreciate this chance to banter.
I appreciate it greatly as well. Thank you.
Thank you.